The sound of thundering hooves echoed through Malad City, Idaho, as dust billowed into the crisp autumn air of 1875. Delilah Grayson clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, watching the lone rider approach with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity that mirrored the sentiments of the small frontier town she now called home. Delilah had arrived in Malad City just 3 months prior, a 24-year-old widow with nothing but a small inheritance, a handful of belongings, and the determination to escape the sympathetic glances that followed her through the streets of Boston. Her late husband, Thomas, had been gone nearly 2 years now, taken by the same fever that had left her barren, according to the grim-faced doctor who'd attended her during her own illness. "Another drifter, looks like," remarked Mrs. Peterson, the owner of the general store where Delilah had found employment. "Town's been seeing more of them lately." "Perhaps he's just passing through," Delilah replied, turning away from the window to continue arranging jars of preserves on the shelf. The bell above the door jingled, and both women turned to see the rider who had now dismounted and entered the store. He stood tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of long days under the unforgiving western sky. A layer of trail dust covered his dark clothing, but there was something in his bearing that distinguished him from the typical rough-edged men who pass through Malad City. "Afternoon, ladies," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His eyes, a striking blue that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance, moved from Mrs. Peterson to Delilah, lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. "Name's Knox Xavier. I hear there might be work at the Thornton Ranch outside of town." Mrs. Peterson nodded. "Mr. Thornton's been looking for experienced hands since his foreman took ill. You know cattle, Mr. Xavier?" "Been working with them since I was a boy, madam. Drove herds from Texas to Kansas, Montana to Wyoming." He offered a small smile. "I can read a cow's mind better than most men can read a book." "The Thornton place is about 5 miles east," Mrs. Peterson replied. "You'll want supplies before heading out there." Knox nodded, placing his hat on the counter. "I'd be obliged if you could help me gather what I need." As Mrs. Peterson bustled around collecting various items, Delilah found herself stealing glances at the cowboy. There was something about him that seemed both dangerous and gentle all at once, like a tamed wildfire. When her eyes met his, she quickly looked away, busying herself with a stack of fabric that needed organizing. "You're new to town yourself," Knox observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Delilah looked up, surprised. "How did you know? Your accent gives you away." "Eastern, I'd guess. Boston," she nodded. "I arrived in the summer. That's a long way to travel alone." "Sometimes distance is exactly what's needed," she replied, turning back to her work. Knox seemed to understand the finality in her tone and didn't press further. When Mrs. Peterson returned with his supplies, he paid promptly, tipped his hat to both women, and departed. Delilah watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode toward the Thornton Ranch, telling herself the flutter in her chest was merely the novelty of meeting someone who had recognized her accent. "Handsome man," Mrs. Peterson remarked with a knowing smile. "And polite, too. Not like some of these frontier ruffians." "I hardly noticed," Delilah lied, returning to her work with renewed focus. That evening, as Delilah prepared a simple supper in the small room she rented above the milliner's shop, she found her thoughts returning to the cowboy with the piercing blue eyes. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to notice a man, let alone think about one after their encounter. Thomas had been her childhood sweetheart, the only man she'd ever loved. His death had left a void she'd believed would never be filled. just as her illness had left her body incapable of the one thing she'd dreamed of since girlhood, becoming a mother. The following Sunday, Delilah sat alone in the back pew of Malad City's modest church. Reverend Simmons delivered his sermon with passionate fervor, but her attention drifted until a movement at the entrance caught her eye. Knox Xavier slipped quietly into the church, dressed in clean clothes, his hair still damp from what must have been a recent wash. He took a seat on the opposite side of the church, and though he didn't look her way, Delilah felt oddly aware of his presence. After the service, the congregation gathered outside for the usual socializing. Delilah exchanged pleasantries with several townspeople who had begun to accept her presence in their tight-knit community. She was discussing the upcoming harvest festival with the blacksmith's wife when Knox approached, hat in hand. "Miss Grayson," he said with a nod. "Good morning." "Mr. Xavier," she replied, surprised he had learned her name. "I see you found work at the Thornton Ranch." "I did, thank you." Mr. Thornton was kind enough to give me the morning off for services. His eyes held a question. "I was wondering if you might allow me to walk you home." Delilah hesitated. Such an offer would surely spark gossip in a town the size of Malad City. Yet something in his direct gaze made her nod in acceptance. "That would be fine, Mr. Xavier." They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before Knox spoke. "Mr. Thornton speaks highly of you, says you've brought a bit of Eastern refinement to Mrs. Peterson's store." "Mr. Thornton is generous with his compliments," Delilah replied. "I merely suggested a few changes to the arrangement of goods. Mrs. Peterson has been very accommodating." "It's not easy starting over in a place like this," Knox said, his voice carrying a hint of personal knowledge. "Folks can be suspicious of outsiders." "Is that what you are, Mr. Xavier?" "An outsider," he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "I suppose I've been one for so long I've forgotten what it feels like to belong somewhere." They reached the milliner's shop where Delilah's room was located. She turned to face him, curious despite her better judgment. "What brings a man like you to a small town like Malad City?" Knox's smile faded slightly. "I've been moving from ranch to ranch for years. Thought it might be time to put down some roots. Malad City seems as good a place as any." He paused. "And you, Miss Grayson, what brings a Boston lady to Idaho territory?" "A fresh start," she said simply, unwilling to share more of her story with a man she barely knew, regardless of how his presence made her pulse quicken. Knox nodded, accepting her reticence. "Well, Miss Grayson, I hope to see you again soon." He placed his hat on his head and tipped it slightly. "Perhaps next Sunday, if not before." "Perhaps," she agreed, watching as he walked away, his gait confident and unhurried. Over the next few weeks, Knox became a regular presence in Malad City on Saturdays when ranch hands typically came to town for supplies and recreation. Unlike many cowboys who headed straight for the saloon, Knox could often be found conversing with townspeople or browsing the selection at Mrs. Peterson's store where Delilah worked. "That Xavier fellow sure seems interested in our merchandise," Mrs. Peterson commented one Saturday afternoon after Knox had purchased a small bag of peppermint candies and lingered to discuss the upcoming town meeting. "Though I suspect it's not my dry goods he's come to see." Delilah felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Xavier is simply being friendly, Mrs. Peterson." "Friendly, indeed," the older woman chuckled. "That man's eyes follow you like a lost puppy whenever you're in the room." Despite her employer's teasing, Delilah found herself looking forward to Knox's visits. He brought stories of places she'd only read about: the vast open plains of Texas, the towering mountains of Colorado, the bustling cattle towns of Kansas. And he listened, truly listened, when she spoke of Boston and her journey west. It was during one such conversation, as they walked together after church, that Knox asked about her family. "Do you have folks back east who miss you?" "My parents are gone," Delilah replied. "My father passed when I was 16, and my mother followed 3 years later. I have an aunt in Philadelphia, but we were never close." Knox nodded thoughtfully. "And no husband waiting for your return?" Delilah's steps faltered slightly. "I was married," she said after a moment. "My husband Thomas died of fever 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Knox said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. "That's a heavy burden to bear alone." "It was," Delilah admitted. "It still is some days." Knox offered his arm, which she took after only a brief hesitation. "I lost my parents young," he shared. "Pa in a mining accident when I was 12, Ma to pneumonia 2 winters later. Been on my own since then." "That's far too young to face the world alone," Delilah said softly. "It taught me to be self-reliant," Knox replied. "Though there are times when I wonder what it might be like to have a place to call home again. A family." The word family struck a painful chord in Delilah's heart. She'd once dreamed of a house filled with children, of watching little ones grow and learn. The doctor's grim pronouncement after her illness had shattered those dreams, leaving her with an emptiness she'd carried west with her. As autumn progressed into winter, Knox became a steady presence in Delilah's life. He would appear at the store with small gifts, a handkerchief he'd purchased in the neighboring town, a book of poetry he'd found among his possessions. Their Sunday walks became a tradition that raised eyebrows among the more conservative townsfolk, but was viewed with benevolent approval by others who saw in them a potential match. When the first heavy snow of the season blanketed Malad City in December, Knox arrived at the store with his horse and a small sleigh borrowed from the Thornton ranch. "Mr. Thornton suggested the roads might be difficult for a lady to navigate," he explained. "I've offered to see you safely home." That evening marked the first time Knox kissed her, a gentle press of lips as they stood on the stairs leading to her room. It was brief and respectful, but it awakened feelings in Delilah she had thought long buried with Thomas. "I should apologize," Knox said afterward, though his eyes held no regret. "There's no need," Delilah replied, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips. Knox smiled, the warmth in his eyes belying the cold December air. "Good night, Delilah." "Good night, Knox," she answered, using his given name for the first time. The winter months brought them closer, as Knox took to escorting Delilah to various town gatherings, the Christmas celebration at the church, the New Year's dance at the town hall, even the occasional dinner at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, who had taken a liking to the hard-working cowboy and the refined Eastern woman. It was Mrs. Thornton who first broached the subject of Knox's intentions one afternoon when Delilah had been invited to tea. "That young man is quite taken with you," the rancher's wife observed. "William says he's never seen Knox so settled or content." "We enjoy each other's company," Delilah replied carefully. Mrs. Thornton's shrewd eyes assessed her. "It's more than that, my dear, and we both know it. The question is, are you ready to consider a future with him?" The question haunted Delilah as winter slowly gave way to spring. Knox had become essential to her happiness, his steady presence a comfort she had not expected to find again after Thomas. But there remained the painful secret she had not shared, that she could never give him children, never be the kind of wife a man like Knox deserved. In early April, as the first wildflowers began to appear on the hills surrounding Malad City, Knox asked Delilah to accompany him on a ride. They traveled east of town, beyond the Thornton property, until they reached a small plateau overlooking a stream swollen with snowmelt. "I wanted to show you something," Knox said, helping her dismount before leading her to a clearing where the foundation of a cabin had been laid. "This land is mine now, 20 acres purchased from Mr. Thornton last month." Delilah looked at the foundation and then at Knox, surprise evident in her expression. "You're building a home." "I am." He took her hands in his. "Delilah, I've wandered most of my life, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots, but meeting you has changed everything. I want a home, a life here in Malad City." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "And I want that life with you if you'll have me." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, but they were not tears of joy. "Knox, there's something you don't know about me, something important." Concern crossed his face. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." Delilah shook her head, pulling her hands from his. "When I was ill, the same illness that took Thomas, the doctor told me I would never be able to have children." The words tumbled out, painful and raw. "I cannot give you a family, Knox, and you deserve that chance with someone who can." Knox was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he stepped forward and cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "Delilah Grayson, I fell in love with you, not the possibility of children. If our life together is just the two of us, that would be more than enough for me." "You say that now," she whispered, "but what about years from now when you watch other men with their sons and daughters?" "Then we'll find other ways to fill our lives," Knox replied firmly. "There are children who need homes, who have lost their parents as we both did. We could give them the family they need." He pressed his forehead to hers. "But what I know, what I'm certain of, is that I want to build a life with you, children or no children." His sincerity broke something loose inside her, a knot of grief and guilt she had carried for so long. "I've wanted a child for as long as I can remember," she admitted through tears. "When the doctor told me it would never happen, it felt like losing Thomas all over again." Knox pulled her into his embrace, holding her as she cried for all she had lost and feared she would never have. When her tears subsided, he tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "Will you marry me, Delilah? Will you build this life with me, whatever it brings?" Looking into his eyes, Delilah saw the future she had stopped believing in, not the one she had imagined as a girl, but one filled with love nonetheless. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Their wedding took place in May, a simple ceremony in the church where they had shared so many Sunday mornings. The entire town turned out to witness the union of the Boston widow and the wandering cowboy who had found each other in the unlikeliest of places. Mr. Thornton stood as Knox's best man, while Mrs. Peterson happily took the role of matron of honor for Delilah. The town seamstress had worked tirelessly on a wedding dress of pale blue silk that complemented Delilah's eyes, and Knox wore a new suit purchased from the mercantile in the neighboring town. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Simmons declared. "Mr. Xavier, you may kiss your bride." Knox's kiss was tender and full of promise, sealing a bond that had grown steadily through the winter months into something neither had expected to find in Malad City, Idaho. The cabin Knox had begun building was completed with the help of neighbors and fellow ranch hands by late June. It was modest but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a front porch where Delilah placed a swing for summer evenings. Knox continued working at the Thornton Ranch while slowly developing their own property, adding a small stable for their horses, and beginning to cultivate a garden under Delilah's direction. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm as summer progressed. Delilah maintained her position at Mrs. Peterson's store 3 days a week. Having discovered, she enjoyed the interaction with townspeople and the sense of purpose it gave her. Knox proved to be a devoted husband, often surprising her with small tokens of affection, wildflowers gathered on his ride home. A piece of ribbon from the mercantile, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a hollow log. "To keep you company when I'm working with the herd," he explained as the tiny orange tabby curled in Delilah's lap. "She's perfect," Delilah replied, stroking the kitten's soft fur. "I'll call her Maple for her color." In August, Delilah awoke one morning feeling unusually tired despite a full night's sleep. Knox noticed her pallor at breakfast and insisted she remain home rather than walk to town for her shift at the store. "Mrs. Peterson can manage without you for a day," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Rest, and I'll return early if I can." The fatigue continued for several days, accompanied by a strange sensitivity to certain smells and a queasiness that was particularly strong in the mornings. It was Mrs. Peterson who first suggested what seemed impossible. "When was your last monthly, dear?" the older woman asked gently after finding Delilah pale and shaky in the store's back room. Delilah stared at her employer in shock. "It can't be that," she whispered. "The doctor in Boston said it was impossible." Mrs. Peterson patted her hand. "Doctors aren't always right, especially about women's matters. My sister was told the same after a terrible fever, yet she has 3 children now." Hope, dangerous and fragile, began to bloom in Delilah's heart. That evening she said nothing to Knox, afraid to voice the possibility only to have it crushed. But over the next 2 weeks, as the symptoms persisted and her monthly time remained absent, she allowed herself to wonder if the impossible had happened. It was Dr. Harrison, Malad City's physician, who confirmed her suspicions in early September. "You're with child, Mrs. Xavier," he announced after examining her. "I'd estimate you're nearly 3 months along." Tears filled Delilah's eyes. "Are you certain? A doctor in Boston told me I would never conceive." Dr. Harrison smiled kindly. "The human body is remarkably resilient, and medicine is not an exact science. Whatever damage the fever caused appears to have healed." He patted her hand. "I suggest you share the news with your husband and begin preparing for a spring arrival." Delilah walked home in a daze, her hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen. A child, she was carrying Knox's child. The miracle she had stopped praying for had somehow been granted. She spent the afternoon preparing Knox's favorite meal, venison stew with dumplings and apple pie for dessert. As the sun began to set, she heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed her dress and went to greet her husband. Knox's face lit up at the sight of her on the porch. "There's my beautiful wife," he called, dismounting with the easy grace that still made her heart flutter. He secured his horse before climbing the steps to kiss her properly. "Something smells wonderful." "I made your favorite," Delilah replied, taking his hand and leading him inside. "Wash up while I set the table." During the meal, Knox talked about his day, the new calves born on the Thornton ranch, the plans for the autumn roundup, the repairs needed for the corral fence. Delilah listened, waiting for the right moment to share her news. As they finished the apple pie, Knox reached across the table to take her hand. "You're quiet tonight. Are you still feeling unwell?" Delilah met his concerned gaze, her heart pounding. "I saw Dr. Harrison today," she began. Alarm flashed across Knox's face. "What's wrong? Is it serious?" "Nothing's wrong," she assured him quickly. "In fact, something is very right." She took a deep breath. "Knox, I'm going to have a baby, our baby, in the spring." Knox stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "But you said the doctor in Boston was wrong," Delilah finished, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Dr. Harrison confirmed it today. We're going to be parents." Knox sat motionless for so long that Delilah began to worry. Then, to her surprise, his blue eyes filled with tears. He rose from his chair and came around the table, kneeling beside her and laying his head gently against her stomach. "A baby," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Our child." When he looked up at her, tears were streaming down his weathered cheeks. The sight broke something open in Delilah's heart. This strong man, overcome by the news of the child they had both believed would never exist. "Are you happy?" she asked softly, stroking his hair. Knox laughed through his tears. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it." He stood, pulling her to her feet and into his embrace. "Delilah Xavier, you have already given me more joy than I ever thought possible, and now this miracle." He kissed her with reverence. "Thank you." "I thought I would never carry a child," Delilah whispered against his chest. "I had accepted it, had made peace with it because I had you." "And now we'll have even more," Knox replied, his hand joining hers over the place where their child grew. "A family of our own." Word of Delilah's pregnancy spread quickly through Malad City, met with genuine delight from those who had witnessed the couple's courtship and marriage. Mrs. Peterson insisted on reducing Delilah's hours at the store as her condition advanced, while Mrs. Thornton began knitting tiny garments and planning a gathering to celebrate the coming child. Knox threw himself into preparations with characteristic determination. He built a cradle from pine he harvested from their land, carving delicate designs along its edges. The second bedroom, which had stood empty, was transformed into a nursery, with a rocking chair positioned near the window and shelves for the books Knox insisted their child would need. "My mother used to read to me," he explained as he arranged the small collection of children's books he'd purchased on a trip to the larger settlement of Pocatello. "Stories about brave knights and clever princesses. I want our child to love stories too." "Our child will be the most fortunate in all of Idaho territory," Delilah replied, watching her husband's careful arrangements with love swelling in her heart. As winter settled over Malad City, Delilah's body changed with her advancing pregnancy. The slight swell of her abdomen became more pronounced, and by Christmas, she felt the first fluttering movements of the baby within her. "Give me your hand," she told Knox one evening as they sat before the fire. She placed his palm against the side of her rounded belly. "Wait." Moments later, a definite bump pressed against his hand. Knox's eyes widened in wonder. "That's our child," he whispered. "Actually moving. Already active," Delilah laughed. "Perhaps we'll have a cowboy like his father, or a strong-willed daughter like her mother," Knox countered with a smile. "Either way, this child will be loved beyond measure." January brought heavy snows that isolated their cabin for days at a time, but Knox had prepared well, ensuring they had ample firewood and provisions. During these quiet days, they would often sit together while Delilah worked on tiny garments and Knox read aloud from one of their books. "What shall we name the baby?" Delilah asked one snowy afternoon as she stitched a small gown. Knox looked up from the book he'd been reading. "I've been thinking about that. If it's a boy, perhaps William, after Mr. Thornton. He's been like a father to me since I arrived here." "William Xavier," Delilah tested the name. "It has a dignified sound, and if it's a girl—" "I thought perhaps Margaret after your mother," Knox suggested. "You've spoken of her with such fondness." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. "Margaret Xavier, it's beautiful." She laid down her sewing to take his hand. "She would have loved you, you know. My mother always said I should marry a man with kind eyes. And do I have kind eyes, Mrs. Xavier?" Knox teased gently. "The kindest I've ever known," she replied, leaning forward to kiss him. As February gave way to March, Delilah's preparations for the baby took on greater urgency. Dr. Harrison visited regularly, pronouncing both mother and child to be in excellent health, but warning that first babies sometimes arrived earlier than expected. Best to be fully prepared by the end of the month, he advised during a checkup in mid-March. Everything looks perfect, but this little one seems eager to meet its parents. Knox took the doctor's words to heart, rarely straying far from the cabin as the expected time drew near. Mr. Thornton, understanding the significance of this event for his foreman, arranged for another hand to take over Knox's duties, telling him, "A man should be with his wife when his first child comes into the world." On the evening of April 2nd, as spring rain pattered against the roof of their cabin, Delilah felt the first contractions begin. They were mild at first, barely distinguishable from the practice contractions she had experienced in recent weeks. But as the night progressed, they grew stronger and more regular. "It's time," she told Knox shortly after midnight. "The baby is coming." Knox's calm demeanor belied the anxiety she knew he felt as he helped her change into a clean nightgown and settled her in their bed before riding through the rain to fetch Dr. Harrison. When they returned, Delilah's labor had intensified, her face flushed with exertion. "You're progressing well," Dr. Harrison assured her after an examination. "This baby is certainly in a hurry to make its appearance." The hours that followed tested Delilah's strength and resolve as the contractions grew increasingly powerful. Knox remained by her side throughout, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, supporting her back when she needed to change positions, and murmuring words of encouragement when the pain threatened to overwhelm her. "You're the strongest woman I know," he told her as dawn broke and her labor reached its peak. "You can do this, Delilah. You're bringing our child into the world." With a final, tremendous effort, Delilah pushed their baby into Dr. Harrison's waiting hands just as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the bedroom window. A lusty cry filled the room and the doctor's face split into a broad smile. "You have a son," he announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Delilah's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Delilah gazed down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He was perfect, tiny fingers curled into fists, a thatch of dark hair like his father's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, she caught a glimpse of what would surely be the same striking blue. "William," she whispered, stroking his cheek with a finger. "William Knox Xavier." Knox sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Delilah's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's head. His face reflected awe and a love so profound it needed no words. "He's amazing," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're amazing." As Dr. Harrison busied himself with the afterbirth and ensuring Delilah's well-being, the new parents marveled at the miracle they had created together, the child that medical science had declared impossible, now breathing and moving in Delilah's arms. "Thank you," Knox whispered against her temple. "For this gift I never dared to hope for. We made him together," Delilah replied, leaning into her husband's strength. "Our impossible dream." The news of William Knox Xavier's birth spread quickly through Malad City, and the days that followed brought a stream of visitors bearing gifts and good wishes. Mrs. Peterson arrived with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green. The Thorntons brought a silver rattle that had belonged to their own son, now grown and living in California. Even Reverend Simmons made the journey to bless the child and congratulate the proud parents. Knox took to fatherhood with natural ease, surprising Delilah with his willingness to change diapers and walk the floor with William when he was fussy in the night. "You need your rest to recover," he insisted when she tried to take the baby from his arms. "Besides, these moments won't last forever. I want to treasure everyone." As spring blossomed into summer, the Xavier family settled into their new rhythm. William grew rapidly, his personality emerging curious, determined, and quick to smile, especially at the sound of his father's voice. Knox continued his work at the Thornton Ranch while developing their own land, planting crops that would eventually allow them to be self-sufficient. On a warm evening in July, as they sat on their porch swing watching the sunset, William asleep in Delilah's arms, Knox shared his vision for their future. "I want to expand the cabin next year, add another bedroom, and perhaps in time we could build a proper ranch house." "Are you planning for more children, Mr. Xavier?" Delilah asked with a smile. Knox's gaze was tender as it moved from her face to their sleeping son. "If we're blessed again, yes. But even if William remains our only child, I want to give him room to grow, to play, to become the man he's meant to be." "I think that's wonderful," Delilah replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Though perhaps we should wait a bit before the next edition. William is quite demanding of my attention at present." Knox chuckled, wrapping his arm around her. "We have all the time in the world, my love. Our life together is just beginning." As darkness fell over the Idaho landscape, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, the grief that had driven her west, the unexpected love she had found with Knox, and the miracle of the child sleeping in her arms. The doctor in Boston had been wrong about so many things, most importantly the capacity of her heart and body to heal, to create new life from the ashes of her past. "What are you thinking about?" Knox asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how life can surprise you," Delilah answered honestly. "How the things we believe impossible sometimes happen anyway, if we're brave enough to keep living, to keep loving." Knox pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's a lesson worth teaching our son." "The first of many," Delilah agreed, smiling as William stirred against her chest, his tiny hand reaching up as if in agreement. The following spring, as William celebrated his first birthday with a gathering that included half the town, Delilah experienced the now familiar symptoms of early pregnancy. She confirmed her suspicions with Dr. Harrison before sharing the news with Knox one evening after they had put William to bed. "It seems our son will have a brother or sister by autumn," she told him, taking his hands in hers. The joy that illuminated Knox's face was no less profound than it had been the first time, his eyes filling with tears of gratitude and wonder. "Another miracle," he whispered, drawing her into his arms. "Another blessing," Delilah corrected gently, "for a family that once seemed impossible." Their daughter, Margaret Rose Xavier, arrived in late September, a perfect counterpoint to her brother with auburn hair that promised to be as vibrant as her mother's and eyes that shifted between blue and green depending on the light. William, now a sturdy toddler with his father's confident stride, approached his baby sister with solemn curiosity that soon gave way to protective affection. As the years passed, the Xavier homestead grew and flourished. Knox's careful management and hard work transformed their original 20 acres into a thriving ranch of over 100, with cattle grazing on the hillsides and crops flourishing in the fertile soil. The cabin expanded into a proper home with rooms for their growing family, including a third child, James Thomas Xavier, who arrived 2 years after Margaret. Delilah's days were filled with the joys and challenges of motherhood, her previous grief transformed into a deep appreciation for the family she had once believed would be denied her. She maintained her friendship with Mrs. Peterson, eventually taking over the management of the store when the older woman decided to retire. Under Delilah's guidance, the establishment evolved into a combination general store and bookshop, bringing a touch of Eastern culture to the frontier town that had become her beloved home. Knox, once a wanderer with no place to call his own, became a respected figure in Malad City. serving on the town council and eventually as a mentor to young men eager to learn the ranching trade. But his greatest pride remained his family, the wife who had shown him the meaning of home, and the children who carried forward the love that had begun with an unexpected meeting in a small general store. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children, now young adults with dreams and ambitions of their own, dance at the town's spring celebration, Knox took Delilah's hand and led her away from the gathering to a quiet spot beneath a flowering apple tree. 20 years, he marveled, his blue eyes still as bright and captivating as the day they'd met, though now framed by lines that spoke of laughter and a life lived fully. Did you ever imagine when you first came to Malad City that this would be your life? Delilah smiled, thinking of the grieving widow who had arrived in Idaho territory with little hope for happiness. Never. I came west believing my dreams were behind me. Instead, I found them waiting here in you and our children. Knox drew her close, his arms as strong and secure as they had been in their youth. I thank God every day that you were brave enough to start again, that our paths crossed in this small corner of the world. As do I, Delilah replied, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. And to think, I once believed I'd never carry a child. Knox's laugh was soft and full of remembered wonder. And I wept like a child myself when you told me the news. The happiest of tears, Delilah recalled, looking up at her husband with love that had only deepened with the passing years. The first of many happy tears, Knox agreed, bending to kiss her with the tenderness that had never diminished, even as their hair silvered and their faces bore the gentle marks of time's passage. As the music from the celebration carried to them on the evening breeze, they held each other beneath the apple blossoms, surrounded by the legacy of love they had built together, a legacy that had begun with an impossible hope and a cowboy's tears of joy, in a small frontier town called Malad City.